And just wanted to thank Scott Pantel real quick and the team at LSI for giving us this opportunity. These are a lot of fun, and I've been coming here since 2019 when I pitched back in the Barty days. So fun to be with this group of panelists. I think I'll let you guys maybe introduce yourselves, and then we'll get it kicked off. You want to start, Nate?
Sure. So briefly, my name is I'm Nate Harrington. I'm with Philips, currently in Philips Ventures, their corporate VC arm. I've been with Philips for 12 years, primarily in business development, so seen the acquisition side as well as partnering side. And before Philips, it was 9 years at Boston Scientific, where it was both operational and BD, so seen that aspect there. And just want to echo, happy to be here.
Hey everybody, Kevin Rocco. I'm currently at CONMED, Consolidated Medical. I came in via a transaction last August. I started as the founder and CEO of a company called Biren. We developed a BioBrace implant used in sports medicine procedures. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Yassaman, Salas, a partner at Goldman Sachs. I run our medical device franchise, everything from M&A to capital raise. And maybe a fun fact across the panelists, I've sold the business to J&J, CONMED, and Philips over the years. So that's my fun fact. Now you're going to have a fun fact.
I have to decide if we like the businesses you sold us now.
Abiomed's a good one, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm Biren Mehta with Johnson & Johnson. I'm with JJDC, which is our venture capital arm. It is, I think, one of the oldest corporate VCs. It's 50 years old this year. We're very active in equity investing across MedTech and Pharm, over 170 active investments in our portfolio. I am 15 years with J&J. I spent the first 14 doing corporate development, M&A. On the MedTech side, I was responsible for about $10 billion of our MedTech business. And just last year, I've moved into this role in JJDC as an investor on the MedTech side and based in California and focused really on investments in the western half of the US.
Great. So I'm going to ask a couple questions that I still don't really know the answers to, and maybe you can help enlighten us. Now, as a board member, we struggle with some of these questions. So the first one I'm going to throw out there is when's the right time to engage a strategic investor? Is it early seed round? Is it Series A? Are there certain dynamics that you feel are the right time? And maybe I'll start with either Biren or Nate. I don't know.
Sure. I would say, honestly, start as early as possible. And by saying that, I'm not suggesting that you ask for money necessarily as early as possible, but I think a lot of these relationships just take place over lots of time. So I would say make yourself aware to who you think the strategics are who might be interested in you at some point. It's a long conversation. We don't mind having initial conversations where someone's saying, I just want to introduce you to my company. I'm not looking for money. Those are always nice conversations. And I would say that sometimes you may not want to be meeting with the investor person per se, but you may be wanting to meet with someone in business development because they're going to lead you through the right paths. I mean, if you really look at either the VC arm or M&A, I don't want to say we're more transactional, whereas BD is a longer-term sort of relationship. If you do get us on the cap table, and if we happen to have a board seat, we will be with you for a long time. But I'd say first, start talking with the BD folks, find out where there's a match, and I'll pass it on.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. It doesn't hurt to start early. If you want to get into the mind of a strategic, or at least J&J, we will invest at all different stages, but it depends on the target. So the things to think about are, if a startup is in a core area of ours, we're more likely to invest earlier. And that's just because we know the space very well. If it's a disruptive technology, we want to get ahead of it. So that's one factor. Another one might be the type of company. If it's a 510K product, we are probably more likely to invest earlier because oftentimes companies will go from a round of investment all the way to FDA approval in one round. And so, sometimes you have to get in earlier, even before first in man on a 510K, in order to be ready to kind of do something, more strategic, like M&A. And then the last thing is, I would say another reason to go early to a strategic is sometimes companies have an enabling technology, and it doesn't make sense for the startup to necessarily build out the entire solution because many aspects of the solution are redundant to what's already out there. And if a strategic identifies that, they might be interested to get involved with you very early in a way that allows for an early exit, if that's something that the startup is interested in. But can't figure that out unless we can understand the technology as early as possible.
And so maybe I'll ask you this question, Biren. I've been trying to sell Biren companies for probably 10 years unsuccessfully. But a gauntlet like J&J, how does a startup navigate that? Should we start with the commercial leadership, get their interest, then talk to the corporate development people, and then talk to the VC arm? Or what's the preferred route as a startup to engage with the strategic?
Yeah, J&J is not complex at all. We're a very small organization of just a few people. No, it's really the opposite, and J&J can be very confusing, as is, I think all large strategics. For us, you can start anywhere. If you find someone in the operating company that's in your space, you can reach out to them. Typically there, it's good to reach out to the business development person. If you come to the venture capital side, they're going to quickly pull in the right people from the franchise, from the business unit to evaluate an opportunity. So you can start anywhere. We're very well connected. An example is a meeting like this. For companies that reached out to me and I wasn't able to meet with, and hopefully this is true because it applies to many people I might have responded to in this room, I always provide, my contact info suggesting, if you think this is something that J&J should be interested in, please send me something non-confidential. I want to take it back to the business, because the worst thing I can do is ignore an opportunity that would have been a great partnership for us to have. And so while we can't always meet with everyone, that's one way to make sure that all channels are open to kind of connecting with us.
Biren, I wish we met 3 years ago. I was trying to raise money from strategics and had a great process with Johnson & Johnson, but couldn't quite get there. Any advice for the people that I'm just going to kind of steal this if you don't mind. I'm just curious. Do you have any advice for companies that have, meeting after meeting to then catalyze action?
Yeah, we were talking about this just before, and Ken, you lost your job as moderator, it seems. Yeah, so how do you push a strategic to make a decision? Because sometimes we do get into analysis paralysis, and you'll just continue to hear, we have one more review, one more review, one more review. And really, strategics can move quickly. Yas will know this, that when she comes to a strategic and says, I'm running a process to sell a company, you guys need to send me a letter of intent, non-binding, within 4 to 6 weeks, we can do it. And that's for billions of dollars. So we have the ability to move quickly. We have the ability to get approvals quickly when something is important, and we understand what those timelines are. And so you got to be careful how you use that, though, because if you're bluffing or you just artificially put some date in mind and you're not going to stick to it, and you have no intention to even be close to sticking to it, then that's not going to create a good kind of trusting relationship. So if you have real deadlines you're targeting, it doesn't have to be external deadlines, but you say as a board, we want to close this round by the end of March. As long as you communicate that early, continue to remind the strategic, if it's important enough for them, they can get it there. Now, if they don't get it there, it may not be important enough to them. And I think that's something startups have a hard time hearing, because what you guys have is the best thing in the world, but that can sometimes be the case.
So from an investment bank standpoint, Yas, when do you like to engage companies? Because I'm sure at Goldman Sachs you have tons of companies coming to you when they are wanting to have an IPO or they have a term sheet in hand, but that may be a little bit late in the game. When's the right time to engage an investment bank?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say, so those are the capital E engagement moments in time. And so I bifurcate between lowercase e engagement, which I view as more relationship building and our opportunity to get to know the business. That I would encourage early, because the better we know the business, the better we can weave it into our conversations with the various stakeholders at the places where I spend my time on the large cap consolidator side. And then ultimately, when it is time for a potential capital raise in the public markets or a potential sale, we're not now trying to get up to speed on the business. We've already immersed ourselves in the business. We've gotten to know you. We understand your objectives, what you're trying to do, and we can work much more efficiently that way. And every case is unique, but I would say early for us to get to know the company, but later often for a formal engagement.
So I think a lot of startups, myself included, if we're smaller, we often think a bank like Goldman Sachs isn't going to pay attention to us as a tiny startup. Is that true, or what's is there a certain deal size that interests you all, or is that a incorrect perception of a startup?
Yeah, I would say that's incorrect. Of course, given the size of my franchise, I have to be on the Abiomed trend. I mean, I don't have to be, but those are kind of industry-defining transactions, whether it was Hillrom, Varian, Abiomed. Those are transactions we're honored to be a part of, and we need to spend time and make sure we're well-positioned there. That said, so much of where we spend our time are on deals that never even get announced, and are small, private transactions. They just don't hit the headlines, so you don't see them. I'd say more than half of our business is less than $1 billion transactions across Goldman Sachs, not just healthcare or medtech. And so we spend a lot of time there. And frankly, what we think we can bring to bear is when we do make that call, it means something, because we don't bluff. I'm not in the business of bluffing. And when we make those calls, our clients know what it means, and they know that there is a time horizon. They have to make a move. This asset will come off the board. And so we use that to our advantage, but we use it, of course, when it's appropriate.
And I guess this is going to be a question both for you and for the strategic investors. If you see another bank starting to work with a startup, is this FOMO factor that we talk about, this fear of missing out, is there truth to that? I mean, if you're seeing, one of your competitive banks, I won't name any, just
those who will not be named.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's FOMO, but there is a pride that comes with running a leading franchise. And so we want to be on every transaction. Can I be on every transaction? No, but we want to be. And most importantly, we want to be associated with industry-leading technology and companies, innovative companies. And so it's less about which of my competitors are everywhere all the time. So I have to assume that they're spending time with all of you, and that's great. So I'm not going to be swayed by that, because there's not enough time in the day. I focus more on the companies and where we think we can actually be most valuable.
So Kevin, you had a nice recent exit. What was your journey in terms of working with strategic investors?
Yeah, interesting question. So for me, I was raising $15 million and looking for that lead. And we had enthusiastic insiders. And so I was approaching strategics about maybe anchoring, maybe leading. And it was actually through those conversations and building those relationships and ultimately a diligence process around a potential investment that some competitive interest, I think, catalyzed an acquisition. And so I think for the entrepreneurs in the room, it is important to go build the relationship with the potential acquirers. And I'm also bullish about going and trying to raise some money from them. And if they say no, that's fine. You go raise money from other people, keep more options open. Because if they start to finally dig into your business and you have a great business and you have a great technology, now maybe they at least know that. So that's kind of how it worked for us, at least.
And did you entertain having multiple strategics, or when you had one that invested, did you?
Interesting question. Yeah. So we were looking for a $5 to $10 million check size from strategic. I probably had something similar from insiders, or a new venture investor could have taken that. So I wasn't really personally pushing for multiple. I'm also on the board of a company called Raytia Medical. Mark Zemmel's in the audience somewhere. Great company. I was talking to Mark, oh, there you are, about he has 2 strategics on his company, and I think he very carefully and wisely brought multiple on board to kind of help keep options open. So I was not able to do that, and we decided to ultimately obviously sell the business to CONMED based on their interest. But if we hadn't gone with CONMED, there were other people interested.
Interesting. And maybe I'll ask Nate you this question. Are you all okay having other strategics on the cap table? Do you prefer to be the only strategic on the cap table? I'm assuming that's the case. You'd prefer it to just be you. But what's your perspective on having more than one strategic on a cap table?
Sure, and I think maybe a preceding question to that, if you're a startup, is do you want a strategic on the cap table? Because I know there can be a lot of misperceptions on that. I think as far as having multiple, you're correct. I don't think we necessarily like to see a lot, but you work with what you got. And I currently serve on boards where I am not the only strategic. And the thing which I think you realize is that when you have board directors from corporate VCs, you're dealing with someone as a corporate director. And so they don't bring their hat saying J&J on their heads. They're thinking in terms of how they're going to help the company. So you're mindful of that more from the cap table perspective, but I don't think it affects how you operate. I do think probably the first question is, can you get a strategic on your cap table, and do you want that? And I think it sort of begs the question that I'm sure others will have an opinion on too, is what value do you get from that? And I think it's important first to know how the corporate VC operates, what their partners look like there, what they frankly can do for you, especially if they're going to be a director. I mean, the first responsibility is fiduciary to the company. Second is thinking like a shareholder, and that's where you and the founders and the CEO should be well aligned. A distant third, at least for me, is Phillips. So I think understand what your options are out there for working with CVCs. How professionally run are they? How seriously do they take venture investing? As I like to say, these are the gifts that keep on taking. You're going to be following on with additional rounds, and you want to make sure that you know the people who are in your foxhole, so to speak. And I do think you can get a lot out of it too. We don't necessarily work closely with our venture portfolio companies, but that's probably good for both of us to have that distance. But when you need a sounding board, whether it's clinical expertise, regulatory expertise, or some other esoteric question, we can bring the expertise to bear. Quite a few times we've actually loaned equipment to our portfolio companies when they're doing preclinical stuff. So I do think there is value to having a CVC or strategic invested. I also think it's important not to tie yourself up. I think the days of ROFRs are long gone. And I don't think you're going to scare away other strategics from even looking at you, as long as you're not giving up any important rights. I'll pass it on to others for their thoughts.
Yeah, maybe I want to add to that, Nate. And look, I think the question of 2 strategics is an interesting one because it probably seems like there's no downside, right? If I can get 2 strategics on my cap table, really the obvious benefit of that is that down the road, when it's time to exit, hopefully you have a better chance of running a competitive bidding process because you have 2 strategics that have been on the journey with you. There is a trade-off though, and that is that strategics are also looking at the relationship in an investment. And as Nate pointed out, there's a lot a strategic can do for a startup in terms of opening up their expertise, providing equipment when it's needed, collaborating with KOLs. There's a lot of things they can do, and if they're the only strategic in the company, they're going to be more likely to do that and to want to do more, because they would feel like if this is successful, they're in a good position to acquire it. And I think when you take two strategics on, you potentially put that at risk. And so there is some trade-off there, that the important question for the entrepreneur is, what are you looking for from a strategic? And if it's really more financial in nature, probably having two strategics will be okay. But if it's much more collaborative, you should evaluate it more carefully.
So how often do you do if you're investing in a company, do you also do a co-marketing agreement where you're going to help commercialize the product? Is that half the time? Is it 10, 15% of the time? How often does that happen for you guys? Or do you try to steer away from that?
Yeah, I'll tell you my brutal opinion on that one. First of all, we're investing in a lot of pre-commercial companies, so the option to do that isn't necessarily on the table. Mm-hmm. And I actually, as an investor, prefer to separate the two. It's not to say I don't think that there shouldn't be partnerships and investments, but when we're looking at that, I'm not trying to steer anything. I'm trying to work with the management team and make sure that they're developing the best possible way. If the management team and the business would like to get into some agreement, and you mentioned commercial, that's probably the most obvious of sort of call it a try before you buy. Mm-hmm. But if it's much earlier on, I just think that you should separate the two. And frankly, you'll be obviously negotiating different agreements, but you'll be working with different people. If you're looking at an investment, you'll be working with us. If you're looking at a partnership, you'll be working with the BD person. And happy to facilitate that, but I do think it's important to not tie the two together. Just my opinion.
Yeah, curious to get others' opinions.
I think the broader question in that is not so much co-marketing, because co-marketing is just one thing, right? There's so many other things. There's acquisition rights, and there can be joint development agreements. There's a lot of things you can do with a strategic. And I think taking a step back, the question for the entrepreneur and the board has to be around matching the level of rights and partnership you're going to give a strategic with the commitment that the strategic is going to give you. And so it's hard to say, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, but you have to decide how many eggs to put in that basket with that strategic, because it could create a lot of dependency. And the risk that a startup would have is, well, what if that strategic changes their mind? Leadership changes, strategy changes, and they no longer see us the same way. Where is that going to leave me as a company? And so if a strategic is not ready to put the level of commitment you're looking for, I would say when you look at the package that you're providing the strategic, be cognizant about how much you're putting in that package. If they're your primary financial investor, because they put a large investment, if you're giving them acquisition rights, if you're giving them first right of distribution, if you start adding all these things up, you're putting your whole company in their hands, which may be okay if they're doing something to show their seriousness in that relationship as well, which can be done, through a variety of contractual things. So it's just, any one thing is not just a co-marketing agreement, just a joint development agreement, just a right of first negotiation, modest financial investment, any one of those things, no issue. Start combining all of them, and you have to just be careful how much you're providing any one party.
I think it's important to just add quickly from the entrepreneurial side, for the people here raising money, planning their next round, it's obviously extremely validating if you have Philips or Johnson & Johnson do a meaningful percentage of your round. The vast majority of investors are followers, and they don't know the market, and they don't know the industry. And so if you can say, JJDC took a deep dive on this, they engaged their commercial team, and they're actually putting their money into this, I think you can get a lot of investors that are on the fence to come in. And so if you're just concerned, if your concern is how do I raise $5 million or how do I raise $10 million, that can sometimes be the catalyst. So just wanted to make that clear. And then I completely agree. Make sure you don't give up too much. And I think if you work with reputable companies that do this regularly, they know that that's no longer an option. So just be careful.
So another route to an exit, and sometimes the VCs don't see an IPO as an exit for various reasons, but a lot of us as entrepreneurs see that as an exit. When is the right time for a company to start to consider, do they go the IPO route? And, I think historically we hear this number of they need to be doing about 30 million is the minimum. Is that accurate? Or, I'd love to get your take on that, Yas.
Yeah, so there's a few questions wrapped in there. The first, in terms of when to be thinking about it, for me, the IPO route is a mindset. And so that mindset begins very early on, in my view. And what does that mean? What that means is you're building a business to remain independent. And so I do think you think about the team that you build around you differently when you're looking to go public potentially versus selling the business. I do think you think about building out a commercial team differently. So there's a lot of decisions you'll make along the way that will set you up for success in an IPO. Of course, there's all the governance and Sachs and all the sort of compliance things that you'll need in place. But that's got to be a mindset, and it's got to be pretty early, I think, to set yourself up for that. In terms of the timing, there is no magic number. I had this conversation with a couple of people earlier today. Is 30 a number? It could be. It's not a bad number. More is better. But actually what we would guide to, and it's very case specific, but one sort of North Star is predictability of revenue, which is so difficult to do when you don't have much of a track record. So in an ideal world, you have multiple quarters where you've been commercializing, and you have KPIs that you're tracking, and you can at least see, okay, we thought we were going to hire this many reps and generate this much revenue at this kind of a cost curve. How did we do? And the closer you get to your forecast quarter after quarter, the more I would argue you're ready to go public. And so sometimes that is 30 million, but not necessarily. Sometimes it takes longer. If it's a capital business, it might be different than if it's a sort of tech-enabled services business. But so there is no specific dollar value, but it has to be a confidence in that forecast, because the worst case scenario in an IPO is to go out with a forecast that you miss immediately, and then it's really a death spiral. And we see this, forget even early small companies, even the separations, we're working on a few different separations right now, and we give them the exact same guidance. That forecast that they come out with, they have to hit those numbers. They have to beat and raise those numbers out of the gates, and you've seen GE Healthcare be able to do that over the last couple of quarters. It's easy to say, very hard to do, and really hard to do when you're early in your commercialization. So longer is always better to stay private, even though I don't get paid to not take you public. So hopefully you take that from a good place.
And so I know one of the areas that the strategics look for deal flow, they look at the accelerators like MedTech Innovator and some of the other bigger ones. And then they also come to events like this where people are doing pitches. Where do you go as an investment bank to find deals, or are there just so many coming into you that you're not proactively coming to events like this that often to proactively find stuff?
This wasn't in the pre-guided questions, by the way. You have gone off the script.
Sorry, I'm going off script a little.
Where do we look for companies? So I'll say what I've said privately to a few of you today, which is we do a pretty poor job of, I specifically, us as a firm, coming to conferences, getting to know companies earlier. And so partly we do rely on former transactions, board members, investors that connect us. But that's not a strategy. And so part of what we're trying to do, frankly, is come to more events like this and spend more time early with companies.
Yeah, that's helpful. Biren, Nate, I know Biren, you're pretty tied in with MedTech Innovator as well. Are there other events or other accelerators that you'd recommend that some of the people consider? Or are there other avenues that you look at to find interesting companies that people may not be thinking about?
In the spaces that we play, there's always industry meetings, and if you're in that space, you would be at those meetings, and so would our broader team. So the venture capital person may not be there, but the business will be there, and the business development person will be there. And so what we talked about earlier was you can get into a large strategic from many different angles. So I think for the spaces we play in, I think we probably do a good job of staying connected to the startups. And then yes, there are the accelerators for very early stage stuff, which are fantastic to be a part of. And these pitch competitions, I think they provide so much good visibility to strategics. So, highly recommended. I think where we get stuck sometimes in strategics is in adjacencies. We don't have large teams of people that are becoming experts in adjacencies. And sometimes a strategic will decide that, hey, we want to be in this new space that we don't play in today. And we have not spent the years to build the relationships, develop the expertise, and yet we're doing large transactions. And so that's where we could do a better job of, staying close to the new technology in adjacent spaces. And I think that's why, when I'm at a meeting like this, I don't only look for startups that are in our core business areas, but I also consider where we're likely going to go in adjacencies and try to meet with those companies as well.
One thing else I would add, if you're trying to get into strategic's attention, is to, in some ways, go to their customers. So if you have KOLs on your boards, they're usually in touch with most of the usual suspects, and to the degree that you make it clear that you're open with that, we listen to the same KOLs too. So aside from the usual places where you meet people, I would say we go to our advisors too and say, are you aware of any companies to the degree that you can speak about them that you think we should be aware of? And that can be pretty effective as well.
I was just going to add that the challenge for the startup is that, especially the CEO, you're obviously raising the round, you're playing the financing game, but you also need to execute and operate whatever industry you're in. So making a big impact at those industry-specific meetings, if you're in orthopedics, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, those kind of flagship meetings, if you can get a lot of booth traffic, you can get to kind of be the belle of the ball, that's what strategics pay attention to. And on behalf of CONMED, I think CONMED does a very good job of watching the market and taking meetings and seeing what's active. But if you're the startup, you got to make sure you show up to these things and make a presence.
I will say, though, sometimes it's tough if you're the startup and you don't have any commercial product. So keep your options open.
For sure.
The market has changed a bit. I think the fundraising environment is different right now. You still see a ton of money going into venture funds, but you don't see an equal amount going into startups right now. I'd love to get your all's take on the trends that are happening right now in healthcare funding. So that's the first question, and I'm going to follow that up with how can startups in the room better prepare themselves for their discussions with you as they're raising money? So first, let's talk about trends, and then how can the companies better prepare themselves?
Maybe I'll start on the trends. I'd say a lot of what we're seeing across the venture community and just investing community is because of some of the IPOs that haven't gone well, and because of the need of their own portfolio, privately held portfolio companies for more capital. That's the majority of where capital is going. So you're seeing more capital raises that are not bringing any new investors, but passing the hat around for the current investor base. And so that's a large portion of where capital is going right now. My hope and expectation is that with some of the tech IPOs that are happening, obviously outside of healthcare and medtech, but a lot of these investors play obviously across industries. And so seeing some success in tech, seeing some success with biotech, whether it's through M&A or IPOs, I do think that's going to help the emotions of investors and hopefully taking their hands out of their pockets and investing in new places.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a backward effect, whether it's exits, IPOs, or just trying to get an improved valuation. This is a challenging time, and I think it's, for me, it's been the year of the bridge. And a lot of insiders hunkering down and deciding to get the company either through to a better time or a clearer value inflection point. And so I know that's something that numerous companies that I'm dealing with are thinking about, which again goes back to know who your investors are, corporate or otherwise, and making sure that they have deep enough pockets for where you need to be, and that they're there to see you through these times that we're going through right now.
I've seen a lot of investment at the very early stage, the friends and family, a lot of surgeons, physicians investing. They want to be investing in startups. And then it really kind of drops off a cliff, in my opinion, until you get out to almost the people that write 8-figure checks.
Yeah.
And so if you're a startup, you got to really triangulate backwards to what will you need to do to bridge that gap so that you are attracting a potential growth stage investor or someone that maybe is willing to go a little bit earlier on you. But you do need a business that can take $15 or $20 million today. I think these funds are typically getting bigger and fewer, at least in medtech. So if anybody's out there, I'm encouraging people to consider that middle, and hopefully we can see more funds writing single-digit millions into rounds.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we don't necessarily talk about is what people often leave out in their presentations that either annoys you guys or frustrates you, that you just see it over and over again. So getting back to that, how do people prepare themselves in a better way to have those discussions with you? Are there any common themes that you see that people tend to not include certain things?
I would say it doesn't annoy me when it's not there, but I think if I was an entrepreneur, I think it's worthwhile to do your homework on the strategic you're going to meet with and understand how your solution fits into their portfolio. Not just about product gap, but also positioning, competitive landscape. If I'm J&J and you know that Medtronic is working on something that is going to leapfrog what I have, and you come to me and you say, hey, I'm sure you're aware Medtronic's working on this. My understanding is you guys don't have that. We've developed something that can help you bridge that gap. Coming with that thoughtfulness will go a long way in getting the strategic's attention. So it doesn't annoy me when it's not there, but I think it's just a good practice.
I can only echo that. I think it's also just as problematic if you reach out to Philips and say, I have a great ophthalmology solution before realizing we're not in ophthalmology.
We are.
I should send them your way.
Maybe it's an adjacency you want to get into, so.
It could be, and maybe just come out and say that if you're thinking of exploring, but no, but I think more to the point that Biren brings up is just know your audience, and know what matters to them, and I think always focus on the unmet need and pain point that you're addressing. If we're reasonably well connected to our business and the markets, then we should hopefully have a decent sense of that too, and that's going to resonate, versus sometimes, this is cliched, but you find technologies looking for a problem to solve. Make sure that you're identifying the problems that resonate with us, and I think it's an even bonus if you've done the homework enough to know the competitive dynamic. Other than that, I most of the time presenting where you are with clarity and where you're trying to go and what you think it's going to take to get there. Make your asks very clear.
I have seen the accelerators do a good job of honing presentations. Yeah. So many of you have been through those programs. I think that's another benefit of going through them.
Yeah, I think one of the best exercises, at least for me personally, was with MedTech Innovator. They make you do, I think, a 5-minute or 7-minute pitch, but they also make you do a 1-minute pitch first, and it's really difficult to get a pitch down to 1 minute, but the process was so educating for me, and I don't know, Kevin, if you had a similar experience with the accelerators, but love to get your take.
I did not do an accelerator, an incubator, a venture studio, any of the many options that are out there today. I think they are good ideas for people wanting to do that. I am thankful that the silver lining of COVID is that you don't have to travel somewhere to give a 3-minute or a 1-minute pitch, because that used to be a thing before COVID. But yes, I think that, look, the quality of pitches at LSI are I think, very good on average. And I think that people here probably don't need to hear these things, but if you can encourage the people that maybe haven't yet made it or can afford to participate in LSI, try to pay it back if you're the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think as you see these programs evolve in terms of funding events, and I'm not just saying that because we're here, I think this is probably the premier MedTech fundraising event that's out there. And there's really not a lot of competing events that are this big with this quality of people just getting the crew that's on stage here. It's great to see that investment banks are coming to these events now. Because I don't think typically in the past you would come, and there's a number of investment banks here, which is great.
I would say Scott and the LSI team are very persistent.
But no, this was great. Appreciate everybody getting on the panel, and look forward to the rest of the next couple days.
Thank you.